What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today we are going to be looking at another random Magic card. And if you are watching this on the YouTube feed, yes, I know what I look like right now. I haven't had a haircut in probably about 4 months, and I just decided, you know what, why bother shaving? So I figured, let's just lean into it. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to be looking at a random Magic card today. I'm looking forward to it. If you enjoy this and you're on YouTube, please go ahead and give it the old thumbs up and subscribe. It helps the channel out a ton, and also if you want to comment, that would be phenomenal. All right, so with plugs out of the way, actually, we have more plugs to go, but with the shameless begging out of the way, let's go ahead and pull up our random Magic card. This is all off the dome. I've just seen this for the first time right now. We are looking at Fall of the Titans. It is an instant from Oath of the Gatewatch that is XX and red. Okay, so we got double X and red for an instant with Surge. You may cast this spell for its surge cost if you or a teammate has cast another spell this turn, and the surge cost is X and 1, so you knock off one of the X's, so you effectively have the converted mana cost, not almost half the converted mana cost. Fall of the Titans deals X damage to each of up to 2 target creatures and or players. Huh. Okay. Well, and that's interesting. And also, I want to point out that the phrasing on it has actually been updated. Looking at the text on it, it looks like the Oracle text for it is actually Fall of the Titans deals X damage to each of up to 2 targets. So it looks like that can actually target Planeswalkers, which is interesting. There is, like, once Planeswalkers got introduced, a lot of older cards, especially burn spells, had to get updated, and they need to figure out, okay, what can touch Planeswalkers and what can't. And so that's something that I find really fascinating. Generally, it appears that the consensus was, if it can touch a player, it can touch a Planeswalker, which makes sense. And then you get into some weird scenarios where cards operate in ways that they never intended, but that happens when you change the rules of the game and add new card types. Anyway, but back to Fall of the Titans. So it's XX and 1, and it deals X damage to up to 2 target creatures and or players. So it's a somewhat restricted fireball that works best if it's the second spell you've cast in a turn. So that's interesting. So as a rare, I feel like this is a pretty interesting view into this particular set. I don't know Oath of the Gatewatch super well. I feel like this is really good sideboard tech against smaller decks, like against weenie aggro decks. This could be really useful because worst case scenario, you have to pay like 3 to kill 2 1/1s. Like, that's not a great rate, but it's not terrible. But if your opponent, if it's in a deck that has little 1-drops, like if you play this after a lightning bolt, it could be a pretty devastating board wipe. Because then all of a sudden for 3 mana you can kill 2 2/2s. Okay, well, that's not nothing. Meanwhile, if it's the first spell you've cast and you cannot cast the surge cost, then it would be, in order to kill 2 2/2s, you'd have to have, 2 2/2s. That's a phrase in Magic that actually makes sense. Anyway, sorry. Overthinking, it's what we do. So in order to kill 2 2/2s with this being the first spell you've cast in any given turn, you'd have to pay 5 for it. And that's expensive. That said, you are knocking out 2 potential threats that way. So there's a time and a place for it. It's also at instant speed, which is definitely worth noting. There are a lot of kind of cheap fireball knockoffs that are at sorcery speed that as a result are almost unplayable. I think Blaze might be a sorcery. I could be mistaken, but there are other versions out there that deal X damage and it's based on, and it's sorcery speed. They're practically unplayable because during your turn, if you're not casting creatures, like dealing direct damage on your turn feels like kind of a waste because your opponents are able to game plan based on that damage. They're able to respond when their turn rolls around. Meanwhile, if it's at instant speed, they can play all kinds of stuff, and then you get to respond to it by casting this on their end step or in the middle of combat in order to change the rules. Like, there's a lot of stuff you can do the moment you have instant speed. It's a huge deal. So newer players out there, the difference between sorcery and instant is huge. The power level difference between instant and sorcery is absolutely phenomenal. So the fact that this is an instant already, like, it's instant, it's direct damage. You can hit players, you can hit creatures. It appears that you can hit planeswalkers with this based on the updated text. So all in all, like, it's not bad. This is a perfectly fine burn spell. It's not wonderful, but it's not bad. Surge as a replacement cost is interesting. Like, it's, I don't know. I don't hate it. Although, actually, the fact that it can trigger off of a teammate is interesting. So if you're in like a two-headed giant scenario, or if you're an old school player like me and you're playing something like Emperor, or actually a format that I just recently found out is called Star Magic, which is really interesting. I'm gonna have to do a podcast on that at some point because it's fascinating. But in those situations where you have teammates, Surge synergizes off of that. So if your teammate plays something, then you could Surge on top of it, and that could be really useful. So if your opponent has a bounce, has a lightning bolt, or even if your opponent has something fairly large, some big instant of their own that you could then Surge off of, there's a lot of great potential. Yeah, it's interesting. I like it. I think this card is pretty solid. I do find it interesting, however, that in Oath of the Gatewatch, it didn't have the Planeswalker phrasing on the actual card. I find that really fascinating because the Planeswalkers were the main characters in that set, so I don't understand the rules changing. So that's something that I'll have to look that up at another time. But yeah, so all in all, that's interesting. I find that particularly interesting. And flavorfully, to get back to the idea of dealing damage to planeswalkers versus dealing damage to players, that is something that I find really fascinating from a lore perspective, because the idea is, as a player, you are a planeswalker. We are all planeswalkers, theoretically, and planeswalkers have big, impressive spells and powers that they can use, and they can summon creatures to battle for them and all that fun stuff. And we see that, actually, in a lot of cases, especially when you look at the way the Planeswalker decks are constructed. There are specific creatures that are assigned to the various Planeswalkers. Well, and the reason for that is they're the creatures that those Planeswalkers can summon. That's the idea, anyway. Or at least, flavorfully, it kind of fits. And so when you're looking at a gameplay mechanic that, okay, we have all of these old burn spells. We have things like Lava Spike or Pulse of the Forge that can only target players. And now, all of a sudden, we have these Planeswalkers in the mix, and we have other things like other things that can only target creatures, and so, okay, we have some spells that target creatures, some spells that target players. Now we have this third thing that can take damage now. So how do we respond to that? Like, what do we use? Well, okay, the idea is the player is a planeswalker, and the creatures are creatures that the planeswalker summons. Okay, so this other card type is planeswalker. So any spell that can influence a planeswalker directly, it would make sense if it can influence a planeswalker directly. And the idea of planeswalker cards is they are allies who are on a similar power level to you that you have called to your aid in battle. That's the idea, anyway. And from the gameplay perspective, it plays that way. When you think about it, the planeswalker gets a turn, and they get to uptick or downtick, and they get to do something. They are casting spells. They are summoning creatures in many cases. And so it kind of fits, like, it feels right. Now, of course, you as the player have complete control over them. But I also want to point out the counters that you're putting on top of planeswalkers are called loyalty counters. When a planeswalker hits 0 loyalty, they aren't dead, but they don't want to fight for you anymore, so they leave. Like, that's the idea. I know that casually over the table we talk about killing your planeswalker. That's not actually what you're doing, theoretically. I mean, how like scorching them with a lightning bolt or running them over with a gigantic monster doesn't kill them, but instead like gets them frumpy, and they, I don't understand how that works, but theoretically that's the idea. They are loyalty counters, how much they're willing to fight for you, and it's kind of an interesting idea, because when you think about their uptick versus their downtick, the spells and effects that are easier for them make you're not pushing them as hard, you're not forcing that much out of them, they're going to like you more. Meanwhile, if you're really leaning on them to carry you and really hoping that they're going to, win the fight for you, and you're relying on those downticks for their ultimates, then maybe they're not going to dig you so much. That's kind of an interesting thought. I like that, but I don't know. I don't know if that was the intended design, but that's how I interpret that anyway, and I enjoy it. So yeah. So anyway, back to Fall of the Titans. It's just a big old burn spell. It's a rock solid burn spell. It can hit up to 2 targets. Like, it's a restrictive lightning bolt. Lightning bolt is or I'm sorry, not Lightning Bolt, Fireball. That's the one. Fireball is just a classic. And the way that Fireball works is it's just X. It's X and 1, deal X damage to a target. And if you want to target multiple things, you can, but you need to pay 1 additional mana for each of them. So it's deal X damage to one target or X, Y damage. Anyway, that's the whole thing. It's a classic. Fireball is an absolute classic. And so the idea of turning mana directly into damage is something that you see in Red. And so Fall of the Titans does that. And it's a matter of how efficiently does Red do it, what other burn spells are available to Red in a particular set that really dictates whether or not it's popular and whether or not it's viable. There's certain cards, like Lightning Bolt, for example, was reprinted into Standard in I think it was M10. I could be mistaken, but it was many years ago now. And I've heard interviews with folks at Wizards who said flat out they will never print Lightning Bolt into Standard again. And actually, we see a situation where Lightning Bolt is coming into the new Jumpstart physical paper products. And Historic on Arena, that is theoretically getting all the Jumpstart cards, is not getting Lightning Bolt. They are specifically removing Lightning Bolt from that set, theoretically for power reasons. And if you're not familiar, Lightning Bolt is a one red mana instant that does 3 damage to any target. And I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, that's just like strictly better shock. Yes, it is. Although based on the timeline in which they were released, shock it's more accurate to say that shock is a balanced Lightning Bolt. Yeah, that's generally more accurate. Anyway, so I find burn spells interesting, especially the interaction between the interaction with Planeswalkers. I find that absolutely fascinating, and so I'm really glad that Fall of the Titans got us there. The artwork also is showing Gideon and Chandra battling against what appears to be one of the Eldrazi Titans. Yeah, and it's not going super well for the Titan. Chandra especially is really wrecking house, and that's not surprising. She freaking rips. That's kind of her jam. Anyway, thanks so much for hanging out, everybody. This has been truly delightful. So as promised at the top of the episode, I do have some more plugs, mainly my Twitch channel. If you enjoy these conversations and want to talk more about it, I actually have a reward, a channel point reward, where you can actually name a card, any card you want, live on stream, and I will give it at least a minute of overthinking, give it the overthinking treatment live on stream. And actually, sometimes if you go out to YouTube right now and you'll see the interface that I'm using, sometimes I'll even go straight into this interface if we're not in the middle of a game, and I'll give it a little bit more time even. So anyway, come check me out. Throw cards at me. I would be more than happy to talk about them and give you a shout out live on stream. So thanks so much. That's twitch.tv/hamhocks42. And stay safe out there. Be good to each other. And I will catch you next time.